Hey, all. Brad here for a very special introduction to an episode I've wanted to put out for a long time, but I honestly just wasn't really sure how to even do it, what words would come to me. But this episode is a tribute to a very close friend that was lost too soon, John Ruhlin. And I wanted to do a tribute episode for those of you that have watched or listened to the show going back to the Elite Advisor Blueprint, or the new show, Do Business, Do Life. John was an early guest, actually introduced to me by Joey Coleman just as his book Giftology was coming out, and became that started really a friendship that was almost a decade old. John took me to my first Front Row Dads experience up in Philadelphia, where I met John Vroman, and just the doors that John opened for me really changed my podcasting journey, how I show up as a dad with some of the introductions. I met Jim Shields at that first Front Row Dad. So John was just really an incredible human that unfortunately we lost a couple months ago. And just one of the saddest moments and experiences of my life, which is why it took me so long to just put into words the impact he had on me. And in today's episode, I share that, just the lessons I learned from John. Those that know him, he's a guy that you can't really put into words, but I tried my very best just to distill and share some of the lessons I learned from John. Much of it just modeled. Like it wasn't like he sat down and said, here are the three things that I want to teach you. It was just how he showed up. He was a guy that modeled and lived who he was and what he believed. And so I share some of those lessons today. And, for a guy that was known for being one of the best gifters on the planet, he wrote the book Giftology. I'll tell you, the greatest gifts he actually gave me were the relationships that he introduced me to. I share some of exactly how John did that in today's episode. And I don't know that there will ever be a moment where those that knew John get over this sadness, but I think one of the best ways to honor someone that you lose or that's gone too soon is to share the lessons and the legacy they left behind. And I heard a long time ago, it's not what you leave to people, it's what you leave in people that will be your legacy. And so I'm proud to be able to pass some of those lessons on that John shared with me in today's episode. And if this episode hits home with you, a couple things. This is episode 85. So the DBDL hotline number, which is not coming to mind right now. So just go to bradleyjohnson.com and it's episode 85. Two things. First off, John left a wife and 4 daughters behind. There is still a GoFundMe up that's live if you're called to support them. So that's option one. If something hits home in today's conversation. Option two, we'll put all the details in the show notes page. But John was working on one of his final projects was a relationship building course, because as gifting really evolved in his thought process behind that, he really started to see gifting was just a way to open the door into relationship building and pouring into others by expecting nothing else in return. And so his team has actually put together a course. I don't know all the details. I actually don't want to take away from this episode, but if you're called to, based on what I share today, to dive in deeper with some of John's teachings when it comes to relationship building, we'll have all the details in the show notes, and there's some sort of a discount. I don't know. We will not make a cent off of it. All of it will go to supporting John's team and the business that he left behind. So with that, I really hope this is one of the most important personally, one of the most important episodes I've ever done. So I hope it adds value to you all. I hope it honors the incredible man that John Ruhlin was. And with that, I will just, we'll kick it over to the episode. Catch you all on the next one. See ya. Today's going to be a very different episode than the normal. Um, Honestly, I sat here for the last 5, 10 minutes trying to gather my thoughts on how I kick off an episode like this. And I think the best way to do it is just to begin, because I want to honor and share some lessons today from one of the best humans that I've ever had the opportunity to connect with in person and get to know, a man named John Ruhlin. Many of you are familiar with him if you've listened to this podcast. He was an early guest on my first podcast, The Elite Advisor Blueprint. I think he was one of my first 10 guests, introduced by my friend Joey Coleman. Actually, right as his book Giftology was coming out. I don't even think it had released yet. In fact, I think it was just coming out. And for those that aren't aware, John passed away pretty tragically, pretty unexpectedly at the age of 44. As I record this a little over a month ago. And I think it hits extra hard to me because I'm 44 today. In fact, I turned 44 just after it happened. And, at my age, I've lost grandparents. But this is the first time where I think it's the first time I've ever lost somebody that was close to me, like a close friend, as well as somebody that it was very untimely and unexpected. And so I wanted to share today's episode because I think, number one, there's a lot of lessons I learned from John in his 44 years. And so I want to honor the man, his legacy, and he left an incredible legacy in 44 years. I learned a lot from him, maybe more than I've learned from anyone, just from observing them and their actions and behaviors and how they show up. And so I want to share those lessons with you all. I want to honor his legacy. And I think it's also in life, when you go through things like this, what do you learn from them and how does that impact you going forward? And I can say John's death has had a pretty dramatic impact on me. How I deal with my own emotions, how I think through how I want to show up, what I'd want my legacy to be, how I want to prioritize my time. There's a lot of things that have gone through my mind in the last month, how I want to love others that matter to me. So I'm just going to dive in. This may be a little rambling, so sorry, but you're just going to hear pretty much straight from the heart. And so I hope this serves you all. I want to start with this story. Actually, one of the stories, one of the shares that most impacted me in any podcast interview I've ever done, and it was an episode with Don Yeager. For those unfamiliar, Don is an author, great human. It's written many biographies, primarily in the sports world because he spent a long time at Sports Illustrated. So wrote Walter Payton's biography before he passed away. Warwick Dunn, many sports greats, and he's done some incredible books around history as well. But Don shared a story that has stuck with me, and I want to kick this conversation off by sharing it because it was a true gift that Don gave me that day. He was sharing a story about John Wooden, so the most famous Division I basketball coach, I think, in the history of Division I basketball. John Wooden, for those unfamiliar, UCLA, coached the late, great Bill Walton, Lou Alcindor, later to become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He won something like 10 straight NCAA championships. Maybe it was 9, but literally went almost undefeated for a decade. And so Coach Wooden, many of his principles that he used to coach and teach basketball have been distilled into business wisdom, and he's had a number of biographies written. In fact, Don Yeager wrote a biography with John Wooden before he passed. And so Don, when he was young and he was at Sports Illustrated, he was invited out to do an article, a piece on a young Shaquille O'Neal and an old John Wooden. I want to say he was probably getting close to 90 at the time, Coach Wooden, and Shaq, I think, was just entering the NBA, just entering the league. And so somewhere through the grapevine, Don hears this story and he's like, wow, this is interesting. Okay, so I'm going to fly out. I'm going to just kind of sit in the room, be a fly on the wall. And he's picturing Coach Wooden just sharing all of these not business, all of these basketball lessons of, what you need to do to perform in the league. So he gets out there and he watches this conversation. He's just blown away because Coach Wooden's sharing principles around living life, how to show up for others, and just this timeless wisdom. And Don, after this conversation concludes and he's just over there taking notes, he gets the courage to go up to Coach Wooden and say, what would a guy like me have to do to mentor with a guy like you? And the first piece of valuable wisdom is Coach Wooden says, well, you'd have to ask. And therein began, I believe it was over a decade-long mentorship. Don would fly out a few times a year. The only requirements were come with questions. I'm not here to like put together curriculum for you. It was like, come with questions. And I think I don't know how long these sessions were, at least a few hours. And Coach Wooden literally, out of the kindness of his heart, mentored Don for over a decade. So this mentorship goes on, and Coach Wooden's getting older, approaching 100 years old and getting a little more frail. And Don's kind of sensing that the time is near. It's, this might be the last time I ever see Coach Wooden alive. And he tells Coach Wooden at the end of the session, he says, Coach, I just want to tell you, when I leave your presence, I feel like I'm a better man. And Coach Wooden answered differently than I think just about any other human would. I think most humans would say, thank you. Hey, no problem. This is fun. Love doing it. All of that sort of stuff. And instead, Coach Wooden says, you should make that your standard. And I remember in that moment during that interview, just hearing that, and it hit. And oftentimes for those of you that do podcasts, when you're in the conversation, you're just kind of flowing and trying to go where the conversation goes. But in that moment, that one hit. And then I went back and I re-listened to it. And then I went back and said, wow, how have I lived? How have I shown up for others? Like when people leave my presence, are they a better version of themselves? Are they a worse version of themselves? Are they neutral? And I think any of us, if we're honest with ourselves, oftentimes we look back and we're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that thing. Or I wasn't the best version of myself. I didn't build the other person up or pour into them. And that is a standard I've tried to uphold ever since hearing that. And I share that story because that was John Ruhlin. He was a guy that when you left his presence, you were a better man or woman because he had a lot of friends. And I think the worst thing I ever heard him say about another person is they were quirky. So think about that. Think about all the things you've said that you're not proud of. And if that's about the worst thing that you've said, you're probably doing all right in life. And I think it's a really interesting standard to try to live life by. Treat others as you want to be treated. Pour into others. Those of us in finance, which if you're listening to this podcast, you most likely are. I mean, this is a relationship business. And I know we talk about a lot of tactics and marketing strategies on this show, but at the end of the day, that's the one that matters most. How do you treat others? Especially when nobody else is looking. And John Ruhlin was that guy that made you a better version of yourself. In fact, I think I was asked, I went to his funeral one of the largest funerals I've ever been to, and I was having a conversation with John Berghoff, who was a close friend that grew up with him at Cutco, and it was after the funeral, which was incredibly emotional. Very, very sad. John's married, has four girls, had four girls, I guess, when he was alive, and age 13 to I think 3 or 4. And I asked John, I was like, "Wow, what are you thinking?" And he said, "That's the saddest and most grateful I've ever been at the same time for an extended period of time." And that pretty much summed up the day, because we were celebrating an incredible human, but we were all ripped apart inside for his family, for honestly, selfishly for ourselves, that we didn't get another moment with this force of nature named John Ruhlin. And there was a couple gatherings. Um, Mike, if you're listening to this, thanks for putting that all together. And I forget who asked me this. It might have been John. There were a lot of Johns there. There were a lot of Johns in Cutco, but they said, "What was the greatest gift that you ever received from John Ruhlin?" And I thought about it for a second, and I said he was the world's best connector and relationship builder that I'd ever met. And this was a guy, by the way, that was known for giving the world's greatest gifts. I have a full Cutco set upstairs in my kitchen, just gifted probably a week or two after I met John the first time, where he came on a podcast. He gifted my dad, brother, and I super nice custom leather passport holders for a trip we took to Sweden. He gifted me probably the world's most expensive corkscrew wine key, a code 38 with my name inscribed in it. So, I mean, the guy just gave without expecting anything in return. But the best gifts he gave, truthfully, were connecting great humans. And so I want to share a few lessons here today that I learned from John. And lesson number one is he was the ultimate connector. And there I learned how to make introductions from John Ruhlin, how to make them properly, I should say. I'd made a lot of introductions before, and I'm going to actually share a video because John was notorious for selfie videos on the iPhone. And so I'll share the last introduction he ever made. It was between me and Will Guidara of Unreasonable Hospitality, who was just on the podcast not too long ago. In fact, we recorded that while John was still alive. And Will said something that really hit home. We were talking before we, as we were getting to know each other a little bit. And he said, "John Ruhlin," he said, "you can't help but be friends with him. He doesn't allow you not to be friends with him." And that was just how he showed up. Very interested in others, always going above and beyond. There was typically something that showed up in the mail not too long after you met him. But I'll share an actual video connection on the show notes of this. So if you're listening to the audio, if you're watching this on YouTube, we should have a link to the show notes. And I will upload the video that John texted Will and I. And I want to deconstruct how he did this, because I now make introductions differently because of John. So the first thing, John was so overly generous with the relationships. He was connected to just about everybody. If you were on a stage anywhere, he had probably either spoken alongside of you or gifted you on one of his clients' behalf. He just had probably the largest Rolodex I've ever seen. And he was gracious with it. I think a lot of people in life kind of hoard these connections. But here's what was cool, is one of the reasons that John was able to connect with so many people is he didn't take advantage of this. He didn't use others for his benefit or on his behalf. Think of him as a guy that was really trying to take all of the people that he was connected with and connect them for their own benefit. And I think that's a really important thing when you look at life. We've all crossed paths, unfortunately, with a lot of takers, that it's just, oh, they're in it for their own personal gain. And John was the exact opposite. He was a giver. And here was what he would do. Because I actually asked John about this. I'm like, hey, help me deconstruct how you do this. So the first thing he would do, um, John helped build my original podcast. He saw something in me, and he introduced me probably to my first 50 guests. I bet he introduced me to at least 10 of those, just out of sheer goodwill. And what he would do is he would check with both sides. So, for example, Will and Brad, he would text or call Will. Hey, Will, got a friend named Brad. He runs a podcast. I think you'd be great on there. He speaks to financial advisors, a lot of which you share your wisdom out of unreasonable hospitality. And he would basically sell Will on why he needs to know Brad. And then he would flip it. Brad, I want to introduce you to Will. Oh, he's a world-class speaker. You guys should, have him in to speak. Definitely have him on the podcast. So he would start by getting both parties excited and getting permission, most importantly. And so once it was a yes on both sides, the double opt-in, the next thing he would do is he would make an introduction like no other. And I've got a lot of really cool friends that are very giving people that make introductions. And I'll tell you, there's a massive difference between a quick email of like, Will meet Brad, Brad meet Will, you guys should connect, or a text, something like that. I will tell you, probably the success rate of connections like that is maybe 50%, 50, 60, and you're kind of chasing the other person around sometimes. Obviously, with busy schedules, that stuff happens. But what John would do, he would take his iPhone. You'll see an example of this. Go to the show notes if you want to see exactly how he did it. And he would do a selfie video, and he would essentially say, Will Guidara, meet Brad Johnson. I'm so excited for you guys to connect. And this wasn't fake excitement. This was real. Like, John got joy in connecting people. And then he would basically do like a mini bio on each side about how awesome the other person was and why he was so excited for this relationship to happen, the connection to happen. And then John, keep in mind, from a sheer volume standpoint, he was Cutco, the knife company, their number one salesperson in the history of the company by like, I don't know how much over number two, but it was a couple times over. So the guy could sell. And he would sell this video of like why it was so important for these two humans to connect. And then he would put a call to action in there. So at the end, he would say, I see a podcast in your future. You definitely should do a podcast together. Brad, definitely you want to have Will come out and speak for you guys. And he would say, in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, make sure you make this happen, guys. So if you think about that, any of us that have been trained in sales, he was boxing it in, closing the sale, basically saying, here's how awesome this guy is or girl. Here's how awesome this guy or girl is. You guys should definitely connect and make it happen by this timeline. And here's a couple of first steps, I think, to get the ball rolling. And the guy was an absolute master. And I don't know that I ever had a John Ruhlin introduction that did not connect. And he would even follow up. He'd say, hey, did you connect with Will? A few weeks later. I had an incredible, I don't know if John took crazy notes or he just had an insane memory, but I feel like he always remembered all the little details, all the kids' names, what you were up to, all of that. He was an absolute incredible listener. So that's lesson number 1. And we'll put an example in the show notes. And by the way, I'm sharing this because as John passed away and I started to go, first off, I was in complete shock. Like, this can't be reality. John was known for doing some pretty insane stunts. And I was like, oh, he's punking us all. And once reality set in, I started thinking about all the lessons I'd learned from him. And I was like, well, this is a shame to let these lessons just sit with me and not share them, because John was kind enough to share them with me. I wanted to pass them on. So that's the goal of this, is to take some of these lessons I learned from John and share them all with you all. to honor the man. Lesson number 2, he showed up differently all the time. There's a lot of things in life that's kind of standard practice. In John's book, Giftology, one of the things he talks about, he ran a professional gifting company. He said, we don't do gifts around the holidays. So the standard Christmas, corporate Christmas gifts, he's like, think about it. You spend all this money during the time of year where everybody's bombarded with gifts. They all blend together. I mean, at our office, they're sitting in the break room where there's literally like buckets of popcorn and all these. And by the way, we're grateful for them. But I will say when you get 50 presents within, a 2 to 3 week period, they all kind of blend together. Like, who gave me that again? And John was notorious for saying, don't show up the same, show up different. Put a scratch in the record. And one of the ways he did that, as I get older, birthdays become more special to me personally. And I think part of it is I see my 3 kids, just like the joy they get out of birthdays. And, we all remember when we were kids, just trying to get to that next level, I'm 13, now I'm a teenager. I'm 18, I'm 21, all of those kind of mile marker ages. And as you get older, it's kind of like, well, here's another one. But you still want, I find that most humans still want to be celebrated and feel special on days like that. And John did that differently. So here's another lesson I got from John. Lesson number 2 is on birthdays, on anniversaries, don't show up like everyone else. Don't do on LinkedIn, click happy birthday. Like, think about the effort. I click a button, it automates happy birthday and it sends the message. So if it's easy, guess what? The majority will do it. And first off, I'm not here to say you shouldn't be grateful anytime anyone in your life wishes you a happy birthday, because that took some form of effort. So, if you're looking at LinkedIn and there's like 40 happy birthdays, you should be grateful that many people took the time to do that for you. But I will say, back to those Christmas gifts around the holidays at the corporate office, they all blend together. And same with like text messages now. Happy birthday, Facebook messages. Well, John did birthdays different. Very similar to how he made introductions. I remember the first birthday message I got from John. I see a text come through on my phone, and it's his face on video. And I believe he was on his way to a speaking engagement. He was in the back of an Uber, and he said something to the effect of, "Hey, Brad, saw today was your birthday, man. Wanted to take a moment. I'm here in the back of an Uber going from here to here, but I wanted to drop you a message and let you know how much I appreciate you. Wanted to wish you a happy birthday and wanted to truly tell you what I value about our friendship." And it was maybe a 30, 45-second video message. And I just remember watching that thing, and I was like, dang, that's like the best birthday message I've ever gotten. I mean, I'm talking even like birthday cards from your parents growing up, from your spouses. And he took the time to make me feel seen. And I think every human at their core wants to feel seen, wants to be appreciated for who they are. And John did little things like that on birthdays. And if you really think about the effort, it took the intention to cut a quick video. It took the intention to think about, what do I appreciate about Brad? How's he show up differently than, my other friends? What's unique about him? And I will tell you, it hits different. And so I borrowed this idea from John, and I don't know how many years back this was, and I'm not perfect at it. But typically when I know it's a friend's birthday, I will cut a selfie video and just share, what's what's unique about that person, what I appreciate about that person, and tell them to be a little bit selfish. It's your birthday, celebrate you, take the day off from work, get out, hang with the fam. And I've shared this with a few friends, and they've adopted it. And I will tell you, I've gotten more messages back. Wow, that was like the best birthday gift or the best birthday message I've ever received in my life. And that was because a guy named John Ruhlin taught me that, taught me how to show up different, how to appreciate others, how to love others for who they are. And so I want to share that with you all. And if I can find one from John, I'll put that in the show notes as well. Unfortunately, I had to switch phones a few years back, and so a lot of those kind of old messages from John, I may not have anymore. But if I have one, I'll definitely upload it in the show notes. Lesson number 3. I learned so much about gifting from John Ruhlin. And I know John here in the last few years, he's actually even gotten away from gifting because I think gifting in general feels almost transactional sometimes. And he really talked about radical generosity and how to give without expecting anything in return and what that can do for you in life. And so I know his company, Ruhlin Group, really made an evolution where it wasn't just gifting. And I believe he actually had a book in the works that I believe they're going to finish and put out. But when it just comes to gifting in finance, we all know this. Our industry is like almost obsessive with gifting, almost wasteful sometimes. And man, I had probably a whole section of my closet that was polos with, insurance company logos or other company logos on them. And so I'm just going to rapid fire a few gifting lessons I learned from John that at Triad, we've really tried to emulate a lot of this. First off, if it has your logo on the gift, the way John described it, he was pretty blunt. That's a marketing item. That's not a gift. And the truth is, a great gift, you remember who you got it from. So if we're concerned about, will they remember where they got this incredible thing from? Yeah, they'll remember if it's a good gift. And so he kind of detached this need to have your company logo splashed all over it. Even when I look at Triad, our mission and what we're about is helping our team, helping our members level up in both business and life. As we say on the podcast, do business, do life. We've even transitioned to a lot more of just like, hey, let's do business, do life. And it's kind of been fun because it doesn't have to have Triad's logos splashed all over it. And we send a lot of gifts that have nothing related to Triad whatsoever on it. But that was the first thing that was like an aha. And he actually switched the game. For example, the Cutco knives, they had Brad and Sarah Johnson engraved on the side. Oftentimes, I know if there were certain mantras, Bible scriptures, things that were important to those that he was gifting to, he would engrave those or make sure that the messaging that was true to that person was embedded into that gift. Next lesson, avoid sending gifts when it's expected. We kind of already hit that with the Christmas, but he would just surprise people. I was talking with Joey Coleman out at his celebration of life, and he sent Joey Coleman's kids it was like a container full of money, which probably was illegal. So John, I think you're good on that one now. But so he wasn't known for following the rules. I was talking to Carissa on his team, and he was notorious for like, hey, we just got to find a way to do this. But it was like a container box of $1 bills with some sort of like almost like a gun that like shoots them out. I don't know that they even make these. And he basically said, hey, I want you all to give this away. Like, find people that you care about to give away without expecting anything in return. So Joey was telling me how I don't believe they've given all the money away yet. They would literally, when they went out to eat, talk about how much does this waiter or waitress deserve and just give way over the top, radically generous. But that gift just showed up out of the blue. Joey's like, I'd get a text and John would be like, are you home? Check the mail. And so everybody loves a surprise, especially when it's a good surprise. And so John was notorious for just drop these things when people least expect them. Also, like the lesson in that story with Joey Coleman, this happens all the time in finance where just the founder or the advisor gets loved on from companies like ours. So how do you incorporate the inner circle? Joey, who's a keynote speaker that does really well for himself, he gets all kinds of gifts. But when you love on his wife and kids, that's going to make an impact. So how can you appreciate the inner circle of the recipient and make their day and love on them? Another thing is not gifting consumables, food, wine. As much as I love wine, the moment it's gone, it's gone. So John looked at a lot of cost per impression, when you get kind of into the business side of it, and he called them artifacts. If something were to happen to me, what are my kids going to fight over and say, hey, I want that. Dad's this. And he told a story, I think, about a harmonica where a family, a father, the patriarch, passed away, and he had a harmonica he played every night after dinner. And the kids fought over probably a $10 harmonica. That was the one thing that they wanted to keep of dad's. And so that's an artifact. That's a family heirloom. And so when you think about gifting, how can you think about gifting things like that? If you can gift to a level where the kids would fight over it after you're gone, that's next level gifting. And I will say, you look at Cutco knives, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, the knives that college kids sell door to door. Well, first off, I can tell you they're incredible knives. But if you look at the next level gifting there, that is the sort of thing to where if it's got our names engraved on them in a really nice block that's sitting in the kitchen, that's helped prepare family meals since before Nellie was born, my youngest, there are emotional attachment because it's there as we break bread, as we entertain. My son Nash, just like he was cutting an onion the other night and like just cut himself a little bit. Well, that was the first probably knife cut that Nash had preparing food. So all of those little memories, all of those things that happen in real life, how can you create gifts like that? I shared earlier, my dad, brother, and I, we took a trip to Sweden. That's where my dad's side of the family is from when he was 65. And those passport covers with our initials on them, by the way, John personalized them. Like I still, every time I pick that up, when I fly internationally, I think about John and that gift the first time and how it just showed up out of the blue because in passing, I said something about, hey, yeah, I'm taking my dad to Sweden to celebrate his 65th. So there's another lesson there too, is how can you incorporate that in your team? John was one of the most active listeners I've ever met. Like you didn't even know it. He was almost like had a Rolodex of information from these conversations we'd have, and he would utilize that. And you can do that in your business too. I remember a story of one of our members that had just a really grumpy client, like notorious, like just the 65, 70-year-old that just is mad at the world every day that they come into the office. And somewhere the receptionist heard that he was going on a fishing trip, a fly fishing trip. And she sent him a little card with like a fishing something on the front. And she went to the local fishing shop and asked them for like the best fishing flies for wherever he was headed. And it was like 5 hand-tied flies or something. It probably was like a $15 present. And that guy, when he got back from the fishing trip, was a whole new guy. All of a sudden, he was hugging, telling stories from the fishing trip. Just, that was so kind of you. Oh, yeah, I caught a fish on that one that you sent me. And it's incredible in life when you when you are aware and you're truly listening and present, the magic that that can create when it comes to gifting and loving on others. And John was a master of that. There's so many lessons. It's hard to, I think one of the things I didn't dread this episode or this podcast. It was just like, how do you honor a guy like John Ruhlin in a 45, 50-minute conversation? I just feel like it's unattainable. So there's a few lessons um, on gifting. Well, I haven't cried yet, so I'm doing all right. But I will say, on the emotional side, this was another lesson. So this is a bonus lesson for y'all. I know a few episodes back, I did the episode on therapy and why I believe every entrepreneur should be in therapy. I have gotten more feedback from that episode than any episode I've ever done. Lots of private messages. I think I've made introductions, 5 or 6 friends, talked through therapy, talked about struggles, just got real. And I'm grateful for that. 3.5 years of therapy now, because I don't know if I would have handled this very well, this loss of a friend, without it. And I think us guys, especially, not that girls don't struggle with this as well, but I definitely know guys, kind of this bottle it up, this reframe it, this ignore it. And I was having a conversation with John Broman, who has also been on the podcast. Those familiar with Front Row Dads, it's an organization he runs, incredible organization. Go check out the podcast if you're a dad trying to be a better dad. I promise you'll level up. And this was the first night everybody kind of got in town, and John was sitting over in the corner talking with a couple guys from Ruhlin's Cutco crew that he grew up with. And everybody was, I mean, there was laughing, there was tears. It was just kind of a surreal, like, is this really happening kind of environment. And I talked with John Broman and he said, I'm just letting myself experience the emotions as they come. And for those, I know we've talked about the Enneagram a lot. Enneagram 7s tend to, when things get rough or tough or uncomfortable, reframe. Well, the good news is, or just go do something fun or something to take their mind off so that they can just kind of ignore it and kind of run from it, quite honestly. And John's an Enneagram 7, I'm an Enneagram 7, and we talked about it. We had a really cool conversation about losing John. One of the things, like, it was, I think, the hardest thing that John Broman had gone through to this point as far as personal loss, definitely the hardest for me. And I kind of processed it the same way. I just was like, okay, let the emotions come, sit in them, don't ignore them, embrace them. And a couple, my friend Justin Donald called me. I think it was on a Monday. Yeah, because it happened on I think John passed on a Sunday. He was on a family vacation, and I can't imagine. And he called me Monday at like noon. Well, he sent me a text and said like we need to talk. So I knew it was one of those like not good texts. And when this happened, I was like kind of in shock, and then I had meetings the rest of the day. And so I was almost like too busy to truly understand what was going on. And then the next morning I was making coffee, just staring at the coffee, and literally just tears started running down my face. And my wife like kind of walked in the pantry and gave me a big hug. And I think in the past I would have tried to shrug it off, move on. Oh, sorry, I'm just. And that night I think it was that night. I was laying in bed and just once again, just it hit me again. And my daughter Nellie was right beside me, and she sees her dad crying, and she starts questioning. She's 8. She starts asking me like, "What's wrong, Dad?" And she starts crying because she's like, sad for me. And it ended up being just a really beautiful moment with myself and my daughter, where hopefully she learned it's okay to be sad. It's okay as a human. Like, we're emotional creatures. And I think if you don't embrace the whole being, the all of being a human, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And honestly, it all comes out eventually. It's just a matter of how long you bottle it up and what the self-medicating behaviors are as you bottle things up. And Nellie and I just really explored, like, in that little 5-10 minute conversation, why I was sad, what it meant to be sad, talked about John, talked about um, the loss of him, and talked about his daughters. And so anyway, it was just a beautiful moment. And so that was another thing I learned from this, is how to process grief, like really process it. And I think that's the reason wasn't able to really do this episode until a month plus after John had passed and we'd celebrated him. I don't know that I could have. And there's a Stoic philosophy. I've shared it a few times, I think, on some episodes, but I think it was Epictetus. He talked about, there's a mental exercise of, he had a prized lamp, I think, that was stolen, is the story. And it was his favorite worldly possession. And it taught him that nothing is forever in this life on this earth. And things like that you appreciate, if you appreciate them more when you have them and know that someday you will not have them, it helps you be more present. It helps you love more in the moment. In fact, the Daily Stoic right here, Memento Mori. I wear this daily because I need the reminder a lot. And it's basically, you could leave life right now, is the rough translation. And that's the truth. I saw a visual, and it showed, like, I'm 44, so life expectancy, who knows what technology will do. I know I got my butt kicked by my trainer this morning trying to extend it a few more years, but call it 80 years old for a male. I'm over the halfway point statistically, if technology doesn't change that. And I think a lot of us look out at the next 40 years, the people we care about and love, and we think we've got 40 years with them. But the reality is, John, I had maybe a couple times a year where we might see each other in person. So in those 40 years, I would have had like twice a year, a handful of more moments with him. And I'm really fortunate, like, I was able, less than a month before he passed, my 2 sons and I road trip to St. Louis and did dinner with him and 2 of his daughters, and got a chance to hang out and really connect. And I'm grateful for that. And that was the last time I ever saw John alive. And I think in life, we have to remember that nothing is forever. Can't take any day for granted, and you got to love those that matter the most. And that was another lesson. Messaged a couple buddies after that and said, hey, we've got to prioritize getting together, getting the families together. So with that, I could probably keep going, and I don't want to turn this into 3 hours of this, but I'm grateful to have known John, grateful to have known his family and know his family, and they're hurting right now. So those of you that personally know Lindsay and the girls, just love on them. I know there's a GoFundMe. We'll put it in the show notes. But if you're moved by this conversation, if you learned something, honor John and go I mean, donate $5 or $10 if you never met the guy, and every little bit can help because I know his family's grieving, they're hurting. I know he was the primary breadwinner. Um, so go do what John would do and just give generously and unconditionally. And I'm going to close with with something that I read a few years back. It's actually out of Jocko's book, Discipline Equals Freedom. And Jocko, being a Navy SEAL, unfortunately has lost some dear friends and other SEALs way before their time. And he wrote a passage, I'm going to read it now, that really impacted me the first time that I read it. And we'll leave this as the parting thought for the episode. Page 62 for those that have this book or want to check it out. And it's just titled Death. But how does good apply to the worst of losses, the death of a loved one? It is easy to think that there is nothing good in death. But then I remember the people I have lost throughout my life, the memories of them, the experiences, the fun, their unique personalities, and everything they gave me. Not only in their life, but in their death. What their life taught me and what their death taught me, the mark they have left on me. And I realized there is good, even in death, there is good. First of all, I was lucky to have had that person in my life. Even if it was only for a short time, too short a time, at least I got that. Those precious moments, those unforgettable memories, at least I got those and got to experience those times. To know the beauty of their personality, their attitude, their outlook on the world. They were all unique, and I am thankful for the opportunity I had to interact with them. Now comes death. Death is horrible, and death is wretched, and death is cruel, and death isn't fair. And I don't know why the best people seem to be taken from us first. Death is also inescapable. There is no way out. No one gets out alive. Death is part of life, like the contrast between the darkness and the light. Without death, there is no life. And the people that I have lost, they taught me that. They taught me how precious life is, how blessed we are to have every day, to learn, to grow, to laugh, to live. To live. To live every day with purpose and passion, to wake up in the morning and be thankful. Thankful for that morning. Thankful for that opportunity to go into the world and live. Live for them. For those who don't have the opportunity, for those who were stolen away by death's cruel hand. For them, I will live. I will revere their memory, and I will live. So, let us cry no more. Let us mourn no more. Let us remember, but let us not dwell. Instead, let us laugh and love, and let us embrace and venerate everything that life is and every opportunity it gives us. Let us live for those who live no more. Let us live to honor them. We'll close with that. So if you're still listening, hopefully this changed your perspective, made you think a little deeper today, made you love a little more of those that you love and appreciate. So go give them a hug, go shoot them a message, go honor John Ruhlin and send them a selfie video and tell them what they mean to you and why they matter. So with that, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for checking out this week's episode. On to this week's featured review. It comes to us from iTunes user The Fit Advisor. 5 stars, a lifeline for advisors. This is a bit of a long one, but a really cool one. I cannot overstate how transformative Brad's podcast has been for my business and personal growth. As a solo advisor, I often felt like I was navigating the complexities of my practice in isolation. However, this podcast has breathed new life into my business, providing me with invaluable knowledge and insights from a diverse range of successful entrepreneurs and advisors. Brad, the creator and host, does a fantastic job curating each episode, His meticulous selection and content ensures that every installment is packed with actionable takeaways that I can implement immediately into my life or business. There have been countless moments where I've heard something that felt like it was spoken directly to me, exactly what I needed to hear at that precise moment. This podcast has become a lifeline, significantly enhancing not only my business strategies, but also my mindset and perspective. I no longer feel like I'm on an island by myself. Instead, I am part of a supportive and knowledgeable community that continuously inspires me to chart a successful course for the future. Whether you're just starting out or have been in the business for years, this show is a must listen. Brad's passion, generosity, and relentless pursuit of helping advisors show up as the best versions of themselves in business and life shine through in every episode. Thank you, Brad, for your dedication and for creating such an empowering resource for advisors everywhere. Wow. That's humbling. So thank you to the Fit Advisor, whoever you are out there. That one is like on the Mount Rushmore of reviews I've ever gotten. That's like one of the kindest, most thoughtful reviews ever. And you definitely invested some time because you said quite a bit in there. And just a few things that hit home with me. I actually was just having this conversation with a guy named Jack. So Jack, if you're out there, a young guy, he's in the military, a go-getter, and a good friend with Colin here that works at Triad. And he asked, hey, could we do some mentoring? And so once a week, we're having a little call, and my only requirement is show up with questions, and that's it. And I'm here to serve however I can. But one of the things we talked about this morning was, what, like if I was to like just throw everything away and start a business from scratch, what would I do? What advice would I give him? Which I thought was a pretty amazing question. And I thought about it, and the first thing that came to mind was Zig Ziglar's famous quote, help enough other people get what they want, and you'll get what you want in life. And that's this podcast for me. Like selfishly, I'm interviewing incredible people that I'm learning a ton from, just trying to stay curious, expand my knowledge base, my horizons, both in business and life. And if I can package that and record it and put it out into the world via this beautiful thing we call the internet these days, and it can help more people, like this individual right here that was kind enough to leave just a incredibly gracious review, that's bonus right there. So yeah, I don't even know what to say off this review. Like sometimes it's a little surreal that, I'm just a small town Kansas farm kid that tried to learn a few things as I fell into finance at the age of 26, and have been fortunate enough. I've been able to connect with some really incredible humans along the way. And this is a $60 mic off Amazon I'm talking into right now. So it's pretty awesome what can happen when you put yourself out there and just try to create value for others and try to help and show gratitude. So so awesome to hear that that's impacting. So the Fit Advisor, so glad this is making an impact on you in both business and life. That's what's cool about this new format, is it's not just the business side, it's the life side, and arguably the more important side. And probably not arguably, but some might argue it. But anyway, I'll stop rambling. The Fit Advisor, if you're out there, hit me up on Twitter at Brad_Johnson, or hit us up on one of the socials, DBDL podcast, and you deserve some DBDL swag for a review like that. You definitely invested some time. So love to send something out to you, connect with you in person if you happen to hear this. All right, y'all. Thanks for listening in. We will catch you on the next episode. Take care.